Hello, everybody. Welcome. So grateful to be alive and have a body and be a mortal, subject to the possibilities of death and or suffering. The Buddhists would have us believe that this is the most privileged position in the continuum of existence as beings. Because the gods and the angels and so forth, they are largely immune to suffering, so they will never awaken. Though it's not a law, it's a principle, right? Just as there are peculiar humans who are born with the intent to awaken from the strange library of impoverishments of consciousness and awareness and sensing and developmental opportunity that plague us as humans. There are children, sometimes who are born, who immediately set out on the task of awakening, of to liberate themselves from the cycles of, well, often one says birth and death, but actually it's not birth. None of the things we say are right. If you can imagine that. Yes, it's much better to not say anything because, as I've often remarked, the longer I keep talking, the more lying I'm likely to be doing. There's a way in which particularly the declarative aspects of speech are very dangerous. If we have any concern for virtue and or veracity, truthfulness, it's not as if there is the truth. Truth is a direction, not a destination, although if the scope of our concern is limited enough, it can become a binary thing, right? It's true or not. In any case, I'm very grateful to have this time today and to be out walking in nature with the trees and the animals and the birds and the young Asian girl who's trying to rescue the crawdad from the walking path, but the crawdad is very adept at defending itself from being picked up, and so she's not sure what to do, and then I come along and I know how to handle a crawdad, hopefully without hurting it, and we all get lucky. Because the crawdad goes back in the water instead of getting crushed and or eaten on the path. And thus may contribute to future generations of crawdads and fulfill the promise of the previous generations of crawdads, which in fact aren't even crawdads or crayfish. They are an instance of the nature and character and purposive spirit of time-space and the origins of time-space. So in a way, that crawdad is the entire universe. All of history and the future localized in one being. An illusion that the being is separate from other beings. An illusion. A very trenchant and compelling illusion. Crawdad looks separate from me. I seem not to be able to know its mind or its senses. I seem not to be able to. But you see, our cognition, what traps us really is this bizarre expenditure of energy that is required to preserve the Alexandrian library of fictions, most of which are lethal, that we are taught to believe and to obey and to subserve and to promulgate and to insist upon and to defend and to take offense over and to complicate in consciousness from childhood onward. And these are fictions of identity, purpose, origin, function. Nature, character, properties, qualities, characteristics. I like this one red-haired jogger guy. He's always having an interesting conversation when I see him. Which seems insightful and rich with the possibility of awareness and learning. He was asking his companion in the conversation whether they feel capable and oriented to do something other than direct anger at someone in their life. It's a very powerful question. So yes, these illusions, these figments in concept and category and language, and some languages are much worse than others. Ergo, some languages are much better than others. Hillman will tell us that the ancient Greek is excellent, and I agree. But languages which preserve the gendering of nouns are also very useful. And those which dispose of this feature lose a dimension. It doesn't matter whether an orange is actually masculine or feminine. What matters is that the dimension of gender not be divided away and thrown away, right? In a similar way, we have thrown away the dimension of time, so that we think that things are continuously one thing, or continuously have one status, or continuously are one person. A known person, an entity whose qualities and stati are knowable and known and static, and this is never the case. Never. But language inclines us to treat identity this way, and thus to treat our own identity this way in thought. And it sets up a very complicated system of banking, accounting, and accusations, threats, countermeasures, measures, strategies, protocols, games, lethal games. And whether or not we as individuals believe those games, our cultures and our civilizations and our societies and our nations, they function according to these fictions that are lethal in that it is impossible for them to have sense. It is impossible for them to be sane, coherent, aware, trustworthy, compassionate, joyful, playful, developmentally robust, sustainable, meaning they don't kill themselves, right? They don't just wipe themselves off the face of the earth every 50 or 100 years, along with most, if not everything else, they can possibly assault. So we live in this cloud of these fictions. And I think it's important to recognize that. Today, however, I am beginning with gratitude. I'm starting out grateful for the opportunity to learn and explore. And I know it probably sounds like I'm lecturing when I make these recordings. It's not untrue that I am. But I'm not merely lecturing because I'm not just reading from the book of things I've known before. Using my concerns, I'm orienting in the possibility space of linguistic and intellectual consciousness, logic, insight, thought. In an attempt to move toward liberation of some kind. Now there are different kinds, right? There are the kinds that put the kibosh on thought and speech altogether, and they rest in the before of thinking and speaking. And most of these are very trustworthy. They're very profound. However, if I were just to make a 90-minute recording of nothing, I doubt my engagement would prosper. So in the playground of speaking and listening, I like to play games that lead us toward understanding, insight, awareness, and liberation from some of the traps that we are otherwise ordinarily subject to, and in fact inclined to preserve and to entrench together, because this is the habit on offer. This is what is rewarded and practiced by many of our relational peers and companions and authorities and so forth. So let's do something else together for a bit, shall we? Now I have a few ideas in mind. I'm not sure which one to pursue, but I'm going to go naturally along some paths that emerged in an earlier conversation with my friend Mr. N, who I am very grateful to have in my life. And who I met through another friend who I first had conversations with when he was in Portugal, Mr. R. Yes, Mr. N is a friend of Mr. R, and now they are both friends of mine. And in our conversation this morning, Mr. N described an extremely peculiar situation in which he saw a group of, I don't know if he explicitly denoted their gender, but I suspect they were either all or mostly male. And what he described was something I've never heard of and had no idea could even possibly exist. Apparently, at some point in his recent travels, he saw a group of people, perhaps mostly men, in strange, orthodox-looking black clothing. He thought that perhaps they were Amish people or possibly some sect of Orthodox Jews, and they were riding special bicycles that travel on train tracks.
But I just wanted to let you know.
And I mentioned to him that this reminded me of the kind of thing that happens in dreams, where the dreaming aspect of consciousness becomes concerned that you're going to shatter the dream by asking some kind of question, usually about what's going on, quote unquote, or identity. Because these sorts of explicit questions are antithetical to the dreaming aspect and tend to cause the collapse of the dreaming manifold, which I think of as a bubble of many bubbles. And the dreaming manifold likes to keep adding bubbles. The waking manifold likes to keep throwing them away. to get to what something is, who something is. Thus, the trenchant Zen question of what is the sound of one hand clapping? Yes, it literally is the mind clapping what against the no hand of the nature of actual identity. Whatness is the sound of one hand clapping, but it's also a hilarious onomatopoetic or onomatopoeic pun, because if you were to try to clap with one hand, you might imagine that if you were a gnat or a very small creature, you would hear this what as the one hand tries to clap against nothing. Which, when, what, where. Which, when, what, where. Why, who, and how are the 7 ions of quest. The 7-fingered hand of the questioning mind. Except that I would argue that maybe it's a 6-fingered hand, and how is the palm, or possibly even the wrist. How is different from the other ones. But the other ones are often very deceptive. So I argued that sometimes in dreaming, my son brought this up the other day. He was like, you know how in a dream, if you ask why is, this is my favorite little dream trope, I imagine a situation in which I'm terrified and I'm fleeing inside a medieval castle, part of which has no walls and is sort of outside while still being a building. I'm fleeing because a 3-inch tall pink tyrannosaur is chasing me, and I think that thing is basically the the fruit of evil. Because in a dream, things can be really weird that way, right? You can see something and it can be you can feel it to be a completely different thing than it appears to be. Thus, a door can be a letter from your friend, or, it doesn't matter. In any case, I imagine that I'm fleeing a 3-inch tall pink tyrannosaur through a medieval castle, part of which has no walls. And suddenly I wonder, wait, what is going on here? Now, in that moment, the dream begins to enter a superposition in a way, or a subposition, depending on how you view it. And I call this moment, I have a special word I made up for it. I call it a gronch. It's a branch that usually has 3 primary prongs. I'll order them collapse to uncollapse. So the first prong is, I can't be being chased by a 3-inch tall pink tyrannosaur through a medieval castle that was missing its walls, but yet is somehow indoors, and it's night, but there's no stars, or whatever. That can't be happening. I must be dreaming. Boom, I wake up. Right? So that's one of the branches of the gronch. The second branch is the dream does this thing called backfilling. I call it backfilling, which is it constructs a pleasantly plausible history, a sort of a what is the word? It constructs a pleasantly plausible figure in memory that satisfies the need for an explanation, but is probably very flimsy in terms of what the waking mind would make of it if someone said that, if someone offered to backfill that way, and says oh, yesterday was your birthday, and at 9 a.m. the pink tyrannosaur rose from the shadows, as it always does, and began to pursue you, and you crossed the field of lollipops and entered the mechanical banking apparatus from which you emerged into the medieval castle in your attempt to evade the tyrannosaurus, this kind of thing. It's very much a construct, but it matches, it sort of, it blurs the pointy ends of the branches of the question that you forged in such a way that you forget the question and just go on dreaming, which is what your dreaming mind would really like to do, because waking up is literally the apocalypse. Right? The whole universe will end. Even if you're being chased by a tyrannosaur, it's better than waking up. So the dream will backfill. And then the third possibility is the gentle intrusion of the understanding that you're dreaming. And when that intrusion is gentle, it doesn't collapse the dreaming manifold, and you land somewhere in the continuum of lucidity that goes all the way from barely lucid, the dream becomes stranger and more vivid, to very lucid, I'm having an out-of-body experience or astral travel, to extremely lucid, I'm actually having a full-on visionary event. And those last two things can be switched around between the middle and the end of the continuum. It's not clear which things are where in the continuum. There's just a lot of different potential topologies that can emerge from the onset of lucidity. But the backfilling thing is really interesting. And what my son said was, you believe the backfilling of dreaming, the universe ends, the entire universe ends, and you wake up, boom, and you're in waking consciousness. And you think you know what things are, where you are, who you are, what has happened, what the history is, what the future may hold. But why do you think that you're not just backfilling? Why do you believe that that your waking mind doesn't use the same principle to establish in consciousness an explanatory framework for what happened before you awoke? And this is a very, very beautiful question. Very profound. It doesn't matter whether the question is... the question is so important that it doesn't matter whether your waking mind does this or not. It certainly is doing some of this, for sure. Right? The question is liberating. And it's liberating because it draws into question, into questing ions, travel particles, transmission particles, exploration particles, discovery particles, ions. Quest ions. It draws into quest ions the otherwise certain blindness that you call your personal history. And anything that draws that deeply into question intelligently is your friend. Because that personal history is burdensome, terrifying, compelling, and will cause you to misbehave if you believe it. Not just with others, but to yourself. You'll misbehave with yourself. And what do I mean by misbehave? I mean think, act, see, and pretend as if things that can't be true are the most important things and have to be defended and preserved and enshrined and made statues of in the psyche and the unconscious and the subconscious and adored and defended, instead of living beings, actual relationships, developmental efflorescence, flowering, right? Growth, all of the things, virtue, insight, creativity, play, wonder, joy, ecstasy, recognition, remembering, dreaming, learning, seeing. All of the beauty, all of the virtues will be sacrificed on the altar of fake suppositions, declarations, identifications, and behaviors. And no one would ever choose that for even a moment unless they had become completely captivated in a hall of delusional mirrors, established and sustained by tradition, and a kind of a marriage to entrapment, prisoneering, impoverishment, victimization of the self and other. There's almost no fiction as compelling as I Am a Victim for the psyche and for the subconscious. So we have to be really, really cautious about that particular branch of possibility, I think. I've seen people obliterate love relationships, attack their liberators, attack those who adore them, in order to subserve a figment in their psyche or subconscious or unconscious or all three or more that presents them as the disabled victim of the trauma in their history. And therefore there's nothing they have to be responsible for, ever. They don't have to take responsibility for any failure. And successes are impossible because other people. This is a very trenchant array of fictions that can destroy entire lineages of humans, not just a single lifetime. Whole lineages can collapse under the weight of this fiction. But what my son was saying was that, how do you know that your waking mind isn't just backfilling all those things? Your dreaming mind does it, and you believe it when you believe it, right? It works when it works. When it doesn't, fine. But it works a lot. So why do you think your waking mind isn't doing something very similar but much more trenchant, much more tangible in consciousness? And that's a brilliant question. And when Mr. N told me about the bicycle riding black-suited humans that we might imagine had beards and perhaps curly sideburns and strange accoutrements, and these bizarre claw-wheeled bicycles that rode on railroad tracks, I thought to myself, and I thought out loud to Mr. N, wow, what if, that sounds like the fingerprint of the non-ordinary right there. That sounds like what your dreaming mind might do to hide this, or what your waking mind might do to hide the sudden intrusion, the sudden catastrophic intrusion of an actual non-ordinary situation where, for example, angels and demons are mating together right in front of you, and your waking mind knows that the whole structure of your identity won't survive that. Right? Like that's a bridge too far. Up with that, we will not put, in the words of Winston Churchill. And so you can imagine that we must experience situations. This is the first time I've ever had this thought today, in which the waking mind realizes, oh shit, this is an apocalypse moment for reality. I'm going to fill in the blanks in consciousness in such a way that we can continue to go on with the fictions of the real waking world in awareness and consciousness, so that they don't just suddenly collapse into phantasmagoria, dreaming, psychedelia, the real psychedelia, not the kind caused by drugs, the actual kind, the fundamental kind, where the mind becomes enraptured with its own processes in such a way that produces a string theoretical yarn ball of feedback loops that make Alice in Wonderland look like an extremely sober transaction at the window of the bank teller on a Monday afternoon, where you deposit $25 and get a little receipt. Right. So there are situations we must imagine in which, just like the dreaming mind struggles to backfill so that the dream is not destroyed, the dreaming mind actually isn't afraid you're going to become lucid. It's afraid of what I would call the dream assassin, which is a faculty or a property of the difference between the orchestration of dreaming awareness and the orchestration of waking awareness. That difference, if it intrudes at a sharp angle, it collapses the dreaming manifold and you awaken. That's apocalypse for the dreaming mind, and the dreaming mind undergoes that apocalypse every time you wake up. Whereas the waking mind doesn't undergo that apocalypse. It goes to sleep, but due to the long historical instructuring of waking mind memory, very different from dreaming mind memory, when it wakes up, it just puts the same costume back on and continues with the historical fiction of personal, social, communal, linguistic, categorical, ideological, political, religious identity. It just continues with its ontological Halloween costume that it always wore. I am Darren. What happened to me yesterday happened to the same guy that's standing right here. In case that's impossible, there's no chance of that. All of these fictions, right? So, this brings us to a syllogism, to the development of a syllogism. What is it that is, to the waking mind, as the sudden imposition of a question or situation that collapses the dreaming manifold is to the dreaming mind? What X is to the waking mind as the Y that ends dreaming is to the dreaming mind? Right? Now, of course, one obvious answer is death, but that's not the one I'm looking for, because that's actually much more mysterious and profound than we suspect. We think of it as just the end of everything, how we may think of it in a million different ways. Most of that's just thinking. Unless the question has been answered in an Amon Hillman-esque theater of Kaikion or Theriac and the mysteries and Medea and the Medusae and the initiation into death, into the aeonic life, and then the resurrection from that. Yeah, beautiful, gorgeous. I love it. Those are his sort of the Hillmanic imprimatur. Those three words: beautiful, gorgeous, oh God, love it. Yeah. All right, but let's not lose our thread here while I'm entertaining myself. So you can see, one of the things I would say is that one of the primary one of the primary forces of the trap that we face in our waking existence is the transfer of the expectation of the physical, locational, and structural continuity of physical objects onto their nature, identity, character, origin, meaning, and purpose. We do this in consciousness. We transfer the expectation that back at home, my door frame to my bedroom is still in the exact condition it was when I left. And I can reasonably expect it to be in that condition when I return. We transfer that certainty onto all features of ontological existence when there is no justification to do so, and actually that is a catastrophic error. In fact, it's a cascade of catastrophic errors. Catastrophic to what? Catastrophic to understanding, to liberation, to insight, to play, to joy, to ecstasy, to healing, to wonder, to awe, to communion, to recognition, to memory, to resurrection of that which, of the essentiality of our beingness together. Yeah. So, I also have often wondered what kind of a gronch like structure in waking consciousness might lead to the waking consciousness version of lucidity. What does it mean to be lucidly awake? Right? Everybody's fascinated by lucid dreaming. I hear very few people, if not no one other than me. There are certainly others who are concerned with it. I just don't know of them. I don't hear anyone talking about lucid waking. It's funny, the other day I was walking with my friend Nathan, and we saw this very bougie looking automobile that I had not seen before, and the brand name on the back of it was Lucid. Yes, I agree. Yes. And well, yes. So, think carefully about what I said before. What is it? What is that X such that it represents to waking consciousness the X or the Y that represents the intrusion into dreaming consciousness of that which will bring the end of dreaming? What is that? What is that? And I'm going to argue that one realistic and useful answer is what we call a vision. There were situations in a certain phase of my life where I was in a very vulnerable situation, where, under certain circumstances, which I will not here detail, my body would become unable to remain awake. I would be forced into sudden sleep, as if everything in my body was running away from me. All the energy that keeps me upright was running away from me. I would collapse onto the couch, and the moment I hit the couch, I would be in a vision. And the vision would show me, it was prophetic, it was accurately prophetic, it would show me very near-term future features and characteristics of beings and situations that would very shortly arise, such as there is someone coming to my house to assist me with a task, right? I would learn things about their family, their home, their history. I would be shown these things in symbols, and it was not like a dream. It was ultra vivid in dimensions that aren't merely color, shape, or aesthetic. It's as if the aesthetic dimension of the vision becomes a kind of meta-information that can be read by an aspect of our intelligence that we don't even know exists, but is highly associated with aesthetic senses of style, character, color, shape, form, the senses that attract us to another human, or that attract us to food, or that disgust us, and affinity and antipathy, these senses. Right? And I would learn impossible things, and then I would be able to test those things when I awoke from the vision. So one of the answers to what is to waking consciousness, as the end of dreaming is to dreaming, as the intrusion of momenta that will bring the dreaming quickly to an end, thus forging the apocalypse of that dream cycle. What are the similar features in our waking experience? And what occurred to me when my friend Mr. N told me of the prodigy he had seen, this word used to be used to refer not just to a genius in a person or an amazingly skillful person, but rather an event, a startling, unexpectedly profound moment in sensory experience where something wildly unexpected occurs. There is a creature often called a potato bug, also known as a Jerusalem cricket. It is crossing the trail. I've never seen one in the wild here, and I've very rarely seen them outside at daylight. I don't know. You know, it's funny, when I'm making recordings, sometimes I'm rather concerned that there are some things that are so profound that your capacity to record them or write them down can be destroyed, right? Come on, dude. You can't stay on the trail, little creature. You're gonna get squished by the humans. You're right in the road. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. Right, okay, you're not gonna go. I'm gonna have to make you. I have to get you off the trail. Yeah. The women cannot see what it is that has fascinated me on the ground, and in fact, I lost track of it myself for a moment there. Just trying to make sure the little Jerusalem cricket doesn't get squished by the human feet, which are very clumsy and big, and that little cricket's very small. I don't know why I suddenly switched into southern accent. I can't find the cricket no more. Save it. I think I'm trying to save it so damn small it's disappeared into the terrain. Yeah, I can't find it. I don't see it. Right, there it is. It's moving around now. Movement differentiates it from the background in a useful way. I think most birds would really like to eat one of these because they got some juicy stuff on their abdomen. Okay. Well, that thing looks safe now. So, when my friend Mr. N told me of the prodigy that he had witnessed, I thought to myself, you know, that sounds like your waking mind just covering up some catastrophic effulgence of non-ordinary, like a volcanic explosion of magmic non-ordinariness right in front of you. And I think it just made you see, like maybe your waking mind just decided, Mr. N, your identity and your worldview and the entire history of your psyche and your ego won't survive if I let you see unshielded that which is emerging before you in your locale, in your situation, ingenious loci. So I'm going to paint some figures on it that you will find puzzling but will not wreck you. I'm just going to paint some figures. So we're going to paint some orthodox people on bicycles that ride on railroad tracks in the middle of the afternoon with their little strange costumes and things. You might actually be seeing people from 1627 in 2024. You won't know. You're going to be puzzled, but at least we'll buffer your delicate consciousness and identity from the explosive, destabilizing effects of the non-ordinary event in which you've become embroiled. And I'd like to think that our excursions are a similar kind of non-ordinary event. And I do some work to buffer you against the emanations of the more than merely human perspectives that I apply in thought, concern, language, speech. So in a way, when I'm asking you what is the thing that is to waking consciousness as the intrusion of the momenta that bring the dream apocalypse is to dreaming consciousness, this is that thing. We have become that thing, here together right now. And that's an amazing gift. It's a very difficult thing to buy. And by the way, that's what people are trying to buy when they go to see a comedian, or when they go to see a philosopher, if they ever do that, or when they go to see a rock band, or when they go to see a magician, right? What are they actually buying? Okay. They're buying the sudden the safe and survivable intrusion of the non-ordinary into their waking world awareness. Right? They don't want to be destroyed, they don't want to be driven mad, but they want novelty. They want to experience novelty because they're suffocating in the prisons of dead knowledge that our cultures and habits and bizarre situation as moderns create, sustain, nurture, and feed at all costs, at every other cost. Right? The humans will destroy everything just to keep those prisons and war games going on. Google, Facebook, Russia, China, United States, South America, drug kingpins, mafias, the Russians, the cartels, the Italians, the billionaires, the Illuminati, all those ridiculous, bizarre figurations that represent the absence of human intelligence, insight, awareness, memory, virtue, veracity, compassion, that represent the opposite of the dreams of every being that ever drew breath on this planet. Those things are eating the past and the future, and everything they can possibly get their largely mechanical tentacles on. Well, that's another answer. That'll ruin your waking mind pretty good too, right? There's a thing that is the opposite of visionary insight, that is a kind of a living death, right? Sort of a zombification, or the result of having been bitten by a vampire. And the vampire doesn't have to be Dracula. It can be Facebook. It can be the United States government. It can be the court system. It can be city council. It can be wokest legions of victimeering revolutionaries. It can be me. It can be anything. It can be an idea. It can be a concept. It can be Christianity. It can be Islam. And Christianity can also be the key to the cage, and so can Islam. They're not just one thing, even though in many cases the fictions on which they are founded are thick and often lethal. So what else can mess up the waking mind? Well, In a sense, this thing we call insanity, which is a very broad catch-all term, not particularly useful. That thing's really dangerous. It's also part and parcel of prodigy, inspiration, and creativity. Getting outside the cage is where art comes from. And insight and discovery. Even scientific discoveries like the amplitudohedron and Hamiltonians and Gödelian incompleteness and the square root of -1, complex numbers, and Eric Weinstein, who says the square root is the psychedelic of math. And if you look on my Medium page, you'll see a little dissertation by him on this topic, which is well worth having a peek at. Mathematics. The weird thing about science is that when it's done really well, and Weinstein would argue that even when it's done poorly in the right way, it becomes better than psychedelic drugs. It will introduce you to features of the real that are so astonishing that psychedelics are boringly trivial the results of psychedelics are boringly trivial in comparison, if we mean by psychedelic drugs. My frenemy, Dr. B, someone who probably doesn't want me to name him based on his associations with very famous people, he will say things like, if you really want to have your mind blown, forget about making stuff up in dreams and visions and things. Just pay very careful attention to what we've discovered using the toolboxes of logic, math, science, and our thirst for true knowledge, right? Which we might call justified true belief. Though there are other more sophisticated ways to think of it. And what he's actually saying is the wildest stories of religion and metaphysics and psychedelia and art are like romper room compared to the actual strangeness of, for example, the amplitudohedron, or Gödelian incompleteness, or Riemannian geometry, the geometric algebras, Grothendieck's inclusion of the mathematician in the math, all of these things. Yeah. There's a universe of staggering, science fiction-y, endless, infinite weirdness that's vastly more strange than all of metaphysics, if only we would entertain it in consciousness. So there's another answer to what is to the waking mind as the intrusion of the momenta that lead to the end of dreaming are to the dreaming mind. Now, obviously, psychedelic drugs are one answer. They're not one of my favorite answers for lots of reasons. People are referring to these as medicines these days. That's not entirely wrong, but it's very dangerous for moderns because they're misguided in their application of these medicines, if they're guided at all. Mostly. There's exceptions. Hillman talks about the venoms of snakes, reptiles, amphibians, insects, poisons from plants, various kinds of dusts, dyes, and things. All of these are historically profound catalysts for the forcible transformation, the forcible and often sudden transformation of waking consciousness into something bordering on either dreaming or death, or both. Oh yeah, there's the woman who, it's so funny. And then we have the broad, endless library of destabilizations of waking consciousness that we think of as insanity. The word sane means clean, just to be clear etymologically. So essentially it means uncleanliness. And you might imagine it as a situation in which the inputs to thought, consciousness, concern, and purpose in awareness, the mouth, if you will, of the mind, becomes connected to its own genitalia and or anus. And so the output, the stuff that you want to get rid of, hygienically or metabolically, in terms of cognitive metabolism, right? That stuff you want to get rid of is being reintroduced directly into what awareness, thought, concern, and purpose, imagining, figuration, excerption, meaning what you choose to pay attention to. The little bits of the possibility space that you choose to pay attention to is excerption. The stuff that you'd be trying to get rid of, that you could think of as poop, cognitive poop or imaginal poop, these things get reintroduced as food or orienting new grist for the mill of the mind, so to speak. And that creates a feedback loop. And most forms of insanity, quote unquote. In fact, actually, the nature of consciousness is just a feedback situation, recursive reintroduction of stimuli. So, all of these things, yes. Insanity, psychosis, delusion. Most of us have had the experience of becoming so focused on one possible future situation or outcome that we are essentially unavailable to our own life, mind, relationships. Situation, home. Overthinking is a word we use to describe this. Most of us are familiar with it under a situation of high stress or fear or injury or all three, including isolation, because isolation is a kind of injury for most of us a lot of the time, not always. Certain features of our cognition can get spun up and sort of feed on their own output, right? Produce a feedback loop. Like the kind of thing that happens when a guitar player puts the pickups on his electric guitar near the amplifier. Hi. Which is producing.
What were you saying?
Which is producing the music, or amplifying the sound of the instrument that's being played. So the input and the output create a recursive loop that quickly arcs toward infinities of output, and one might imagine explodes. In fact, an explosion is really an explosion of any kind, including the really dangerous kinds like the nuclear ones, are They are iterative, wave-like expressions of a focused phenomena having overcome the boundary condition under which it remains stable. Think carefully about that, because our consciousness is also wave-like. And there are situations that can overcome the boundary conditions under which it remains stable. And it has defenses against that, and it will bring those defenses into play. Backfilling in dreaming is one of them. Sustain the dream, not at all costs, right? The dreaming mind isn't like the waking mind in this case. The dreaming mind isn't as, what will we call it, severe and fervent and urgently motivated to continue its dominance of the situation the way the waking mind is. Thus, if your dreaming mind was like that, your dreaming memories would literally be a second identity. And the concept of Superman and of superheroes and all of these things, these are symbolic representations of the dreaming mind's willingness to not dominate the situation, even though its powers are vastly, monumentally outweigh the powers of the waking world intelligence faculties. In fact, those waking world intelligence faculties depend in their basis on assets nurtured, established, and intelligently and structured by the dreaming mind. There would be no waking mind if there was no dreaming. And the waking mind thinks, well, you don't need that dreaming thing. I like to make machines and war things and fuck shit up and blow things up and build bullets and nails and stuff. Put things together. I'm the maker of things. I'm the one that counts. Well, it wouldn't exist at all if it wasn't for the liquid, cloud-like fluid basis, the emotional, beautiful, childlike wonder and anciently conserved intelligences that are liquid and flowing and belong to the other aspects of our awareness and consciousness. Not just the dreaming mind. The before of both, the before of the division between them is a thing that's very difficult to point at, but has primacy here. So, yes. I think. Now, it's entirely possible that someone who's listening will either know or do some research and find out that there are strangely garbed people who ride weird bicycles on things resembling train tracks in some part of the eastern seaboard of the United States in the afternoon. And they'll come back and they'll go, oh yeah, those are just blobbity-blahs. Those are the visitors or the thatitors. These people who do this. And they'll think, unfortunately, because their waking mind is dominating them, that they've solved the mystery and there are no such situations where the waking mind has to scramble to produce an illusion to try to keep the entire structure of your identity and ontological framework and categorical lexicon from being irrevocably and permanently violated forever.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet, if we were truly aware, encountering any organism would have this effect upon us immediately. Because there's nothing as non-ordinarily astonishing as a living being in time-space. infinitely astonishing. Wave after wave of unjustifiable novel astonishment. We call it a bluebird, a praying mantis, a mouse, the rattlesnake, oak tree, the mountain, the star, the moon, the sun. All of these phenomena are exactly the thing that would obliterate the lethal library of fictions that suppose our human intellectual, ontological, and epistemological supremacy. These would be completely destroyed by actually attending the existence of an ant or a mouse. Of course, nobody wants those things destroyed. Well, that's not true. Some of us do, and that's why some of you are listening. Okay, where are we going here? There's a path. I'm using a compass to find my way through the possibility space. I want you to ask yourself what, on the compass that Darren is using today and in his previous videos, what represents true north? Because it's not merely truth, though that's important. It's not merely virtue, though that's important. Maybe there's no single thing that represents true north. Maybe what represents true north for Darren in his orienteering activity is a hyperstructure of originary concerns that orient the nature of existence and beings and minds themselves. But imagine, if you will, a phenomena so dangerous that it threatens to obliterate the interior Catholic Church, right? It threatens to obliterate the Pope. It threatens to obliterate the cathedral in Rome, whose name for some reason evades me at the moment. Maybe my waking mind is protecting this asset from attack. It threatens to obliterate. Imagine that you see something that there's no way your identity or your understanding of reality, your entire value system, your belief in the continuity and comprehensibility of human experience, the whole the layer of consciousness in which representational cognition reigns supreme. If you encounter something that threatens that whole substrate, that whole layer, thus also threatening your identity in everything you've ever thought or believed, in every justification for every action that you ever attempted to justify with an argument or an evaluation or an analysis or math. If something showed up in your experience that had the potential to violate all of that, what would you do? How would you respond? Would you cleave interiorly to all you've known before, all you have believed? The philosophical and ideological and relational and evaluative foundations of your normality, your normalcy, your domestication? Or would you instead arch your neck in the direction of liberty and raise your brow toward the light on the horizon of consciousness that represents a catastrophic, infinite cascade of jail-breaking liberations? The effect and sequelae of which, the repercussions of which are unknown You know all too well the familiarity of the cages in which your waking mind has traversed, has circumambulated its little prison cell over and over again and reassured itself of the position of every bar and every lock and every system that therein traps you, and thus traps your ancestors, and thus traps your progeny, and thus traps the universe. And how belovedly familiar are these cages to us? The cage of Darren, his history, his personal history, his knowledge, his accomplishments, his failures.
Hello. Can you let me see how big the sound waves get?
His creations, the things he takes credit for, the things he prosecutes others for. And I don't want you to think the waking mind is a bad being. It's not. It's just very problematical for us because it's largely in service to the prisoneering aspects of human culture, language, behavior, tradition, gatekeeping, all these things. Would you arch your neck toward liberty? Would you really? And if you think there's no phenomena that does this, just understand that every sunset does this. I mean, there's very simple phenomena that do this all the time. But an earthquake will mess you up, for sure. Solar eclipse, thunderstorm mess you up. Your waking mind can readjust to those, presuming you mostly survive them. A volcanic eruption will rock your boat. But there are phenomena that we don't really have. The phenomena that actually mess up our the phenomena that attack the bases of our lexicons that we use to determine the categorical identity of beings and situations and characteristics and values and directions and temporality, time especially. These things are delicate in humans' minds and cultures. And anything that attacks them can destroy our minds. It can destroy the possibility of having minds at all. And that's something that I'm going to get to in a minute, though, because I just want to reel back the line a little bit. Presuming I can continue this very dangerous tightrope walking game I'm playing in my own consciousness right now, in an attempt to chart a course that leads outside the prisons. The categories. Okay. So we have this topic which used to be called UFOs and is now referred to as the phenomenon. The phenomenon? I always get those two confused. It's really fun to confuse them. I just can't quite remember. I think phenomena is singular and phenomenon is plural, but it could be the other way around. I just can't really tell.
It was busy too on a Tuesday.
I love when humans are having really animated conversations together. I love animation. I mean, animation's ecstatically wonderful. To be human is astonishing, even in relatively dark circumstances. It is amazing. Yeah. I know you want to touch that animal, but it won't be happy. Like, I could give you a peanut and you could attract it, but it won't go well. Okay, good. That guy was funny because he knew he was edge walking, right? He wanted the attention of the squirrel, but he also knew that the fulfillment of his play would be disastrous. Now that weird situation where you're in the liminal space between where you're inviting apocalypse and you're edge walking toward it, but you don't intend to invoke it, and you're carefully avoiding the invocation, the moves that will cause the collapse that becomes unavoidable, which is what I'm doing here. Okay? Because I'm doing the same damn thing I'm talking about. I used to have a neologism to point at this behavior where what you are saying becomes the enaction of what you are speaking about. Yeah? There's a way of speaking, and I'm doing it here, where you accomplish the thing you're describing. Yeah? The things you are saying become the accomplishment of that which you are describing. So we have this thing, we used to call it, probably the first thing it was called in modern times, and it was called other things long ago, was flying saucers. Think very carefully about the words that are being used here, flying saucers. That later became UFOs, unidentified flying objects, which further transformed. Now you can see what's going on here. Waves of experience are impacting on the core of our lexicons, right? The foundations of identity and consciousness, the core, the root of the possibility of having a lexicon at all. And that becomes UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, or unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Can't remember. I'll get it. I'll learn again later. And then that simply, because of how robust and complex what's going on is, turns out to involve things like telepathy, UFOs, near-death experiences, a broad array of psychic phenomena such as telekinesis, synchronicity, high strangeness of various kinds, things in the sky that aren't stars, aren't spaceships, aren't all they are is they're like the standing violations of the possibility of categorization. Think about that. Okay, now anything that does that draws the entire category tree into question. And anything that draws the entire category tree into question can be weaponized. And has been weaponized and is being weaponized. We'll get to that later. Anything that... Okay. So there are these root ideas that are concepts, and the possibility of forming a coherent tree of identity is rooted in. And if you mess that up, humans go nuts. Now, there are ways of messing that up that lead to enlightenment, not just insanity. Alfred Korzybski, with his non-Aristotelian logic, was trying to invent a coherent way to compromise the basis of identity, hilariously, to protect it from the kinds of compromise it must otherwise continuously be subject to. Hilarious. I'm gonna compromise the basis of identity in such a way that we acquire immunity to the entire library of compromises that must otherwise ensue. This is a truly heroic intention, a brilliant intention from a half-mad genius who must have really adored the world and humans, even though some of what he said was complete nonsense. So the non-Aristotelian assertion, the Aristotelian assertion first is A equals A tree is a tree. It is never not a tree. Korzybski said, no, a tree is never a tree. Whatever a tree might be, it can't be this word tree, it can't be the concept tree, it can't be the category tree. Whatever it is something far beyond anything that we can possibly encapsulate in cognitive behavior that is trustworthy and veritable. There are exceptions. There's a sort of a yes, but version of general semantics. But what Korzybski's trying to do is to get us to see through the terrifying prison of categorical identity and its lies, because all events or reference or nominata, right, the stuff that language points our attention toward, if I say there is a dog, the actual event that I'm pointing at with the word dog, the situation I'm pointing at, the circumstances I'm pointing at, are never static, and they have infinite qualities, and they have infinite associations and infinite relationships. So how can we snip that off and go, oh no, it's a dog? And then think we're right. That rectitude, that desire for cognitive and categorical rectitude, what is that? Is really dangerous to anyone who's trying to be actually intelligent or to become intelligent. You don't want to throw the whole system away, that just leads to incoherence. You need to navigate within the system in a way that both recognizes its frail and fictional foundations, and yet can make moves within that are trustworthy, useful, lead to insight, liberation, development, play, growth, ecstasis, wonder, discovery, and so forth. So you can play in the field of the fictions as long as you don't take them very seriously. Once you realize that their foundations are confused or baseless, you can then play freely with them without being trapped by them or in them, depending on the degree to which you have truly understood their baselessness and established that baselessness in your awareness. The UFO phenomenon is a reality-violating phenomenon. It violates the entire, what we call the phenomenon, right? Violates the entire library of human lexical referent objects, tokens. It throws the whole kit and caboodle into cataclysmic spasms of failure. Right? Like imagine if our understanding of identity were to have an epileptic fit. That's what the UFO phenomenon does. And this is what I'm suggesting. Mr. N's mind might have been working very diligently to counteract the effects of in consciousness. In a situation where the foundations of conscious coherence are at risk, the waking mind will backfill. It will make stuff up, and it will paint over reality and try to get us to see something that might be puzzling, but won't obliterate the entire history of our identity, thought about identity, nature, meaning, humans, animals, the sky, the earth, the world, dreaming, all these things, right? They all are linked together, and as long as they're very limited in what they mean, each of these words, we feel safe, we know what to expect, we don't have to overthink it, we don't become hypervigilant, etc. So, this is what the humans have been practicing, and it's as lethal as it is effective. It's also unfortunate because our actual nature is utterly transcendental to these concepts of category and identity. Completely transcendental to them. To the degree that quantum physics is transcendental to, I don't know, a photograph of a light switch. I guess they both partake of a similar phenomenon, but yeah, I mean, this is just not the same thing at all. We are not what we think of as human. What we actually are is so radically self-transcending that it's unencapsulable. It would obliterate everything we've ever thought or believed, all of religion, all of science, all of language. It would just lay smoldering rubble is all that would be left of those things. Human ways of knowing obliterated. So this is part of what we're trying to protect ourselves from with language. And concepts and predictable, static identity.
La miré en los ojos. La miré.
A child was frozen in a pose, a theatrical pose, frozen, calling out to his father who was taking a picture of a statue. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Think carefully about what I just said. And the child's making this call, Ma, Ma. His father's photographing a statue. The child is frozen in space in a theatrical pose, calling to his father. What a beautiful example of the motivations of human cognition. And everything I've spoken of today, with one exception, the weaponization. Let me be clear. If you were to see, for example, something that isn't supposed to exist, an angel, a god, a daimon, a daemon, a deva, a jinn, a UFO, the dead, your mind would try to paint it over in such a way as to protect you from the repercussions of having seen the unseeable, that which must not be. Why must it not be? It must not be because the regime of the supremacy of the categories and language in waking consciousness must never be violated by anything that exists. That supremacy must be maintained at all costs, including the cost of apocalypse. And that supremacy is what will destroy our world and every living thing on it, because our collectives are oriented by a similar fictional supremacy. And they will defend it against everything alive. They will see organisms as the absolute enemy because of their novelty and their transcendentalness to those lexicons, to those categories, to those names. This aspect of what McGilchrist might call the emissary that has become a Ronin that is trying to overcome its master Imagine the finger that attempts to dominate and destroy the sovereignty of the body. It's the same kind of problem in cognition and in consciousness. So, this is what we're facing. This is where we are as humans. We're in this terrible multipolar trap, as Daniel Schmachtenberger so brilliantly describes it, a multipolar trap. It's not merely bipolar, right? If it were bipolar, we'd have a shot at resolving it. No, it keeps adding new polarities as we attempt to resolve it. What is that dragon that has so many heads and just keeps breeding heads? If you cut one off, two grow there. No, it's not the Gorgon, that's a Medusa. You know what I mean. Again, my mind is, because of what I'm trying to do with it, I'm trying to use the faculties of my mind in service of the path that grants us liberty from the traps that language itself naturally forges simply by speaking. The Hydra. Yeah, this is the problem. You can't cut the heads off. You have to deal with this problem in a different way. A multipolar trap can't be dealt with by attacking one or two heads or something. It just doesn't work. All right, so we've seen amazing vistas here today. The thing I want you to understand is that if you were to see in the sky a thing that is transcendental to human categories, what do you suppose your mind would do? Do you think you would see what is there? No, you will not see what is there. In fact, it might be impossible to see what is there. And the humans are going to try to tell you that it's this or that. It's an invading force from time-space. It's demons. They're going to try to fit it into the existing categories. But what it is a ladder that leads beyond the possibility of the supremacy of the categories in which we believe. Right? It is an escape hatch, what Eric Weinstein might call a panic room, where the universe comes down, taps you on the shoulder and says, little children, the toys you have been playing with are too primitive to carry you forward to your next developmental phase. Leave them aside, let us show you new ones. That's what it is. And that always happens in a developmental arc. Often when this occurs, what the beings involved do is they ironically turn around and look back toward history and turn to salt. So it's in the biblical story, right? Where Sodom is being destroyed and Lot is leaving with his wife, and they were told not to look back. Wow. Human families are so beautifully amazing. There's like these two adults, their little daughter, she's pushing her carriage, they've got their little dog, they're walking across the street. It's just astoundingly gorgeous. It's like the whole universe vulnerably expressed in a localization of fragility and love and continuity and hope and faith and danger, and it's so beautiful. So this phenomenon is pointing at the inadequacy of our categories. When you hear people trying to cram it into some existing category, I think Lou Elizondo recently said that there's every sign from this that an invasion is imminent. What a load of bullshit. My God. No wonder people mistrust Lou. That's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. If that happens, you can be sure that's a human psyop in a last-ditch attempt to maintain the supremacy of the war categories that have crippled and obliterated our people, our history, and our future for billions of human lifetimes. Because there's 8 billion humans right now. So if people go like, "What do you mean billions of lifetimes? There's only been a few million lifetimes." No, wrong. In 10 years, there's 8 billion lifetimes right now. I mean, over 100 years now. Well, actually, let's shrink the scope a little bit more appropriate. Over 60 years, say from 1970, I don't know, 80, 90, 2000, 10, 20, it's 50. 1960 to now, let's say, there have been billions of humans have had lifetimes, right? And billions of human lifetimes can happen in 100 years. Follow? So for billions of human lifetimes, we've been tortured and terrified by war and commerce and colonization and progress and technology, but have abject failure to establish anything resembling an intelligent human society. And you got people like Elizondo telling you, like, those things in the sky, they seem to portend an invasion of some kind. Yeah, well, it ain't a military invasion, let me tell you that much. And whatever might be existing in time-space is probably a lot less dangerous than anything you've encountered as just being a human being. Because human beings, individually and in small cohorts, are amazing and beautiful and lovely. But in large groups or societies or nations where they've been captured by these lethal processes that I sometimes call thrisps, but you can just call corporate agendas, they are the deadliest thing you can possibly find, and there's nothing in space-time as deadly as that. So don't be afraid of the sky. Be afraid of the zombie roboticized humans that are obeying nonsense in language and culture and obliterating the planet and each other and those beautiful families like the one that I saw for the sake of fictions in language or for the sake of the superiority of a conceptual framework of identity and value. That is fucking terrifying. That is terrifying. But the phenomena is the lighthouse that leads beyond the possibilities of the categories we've come to trust. And this leads me to the tail end of my exploration today, which is the weaponization of the human capacity to derive identity at all. Right? You see, it turns out that in terms of military advantage, if you can go after, I'm going to back up and say one thing before I leave the topic of the UFOs. If you were to see something that you can't see, your mind will paint it over with something that might be puzzling, but you can survive it. Clowns in silver suits were in the trees. As the days go by, there's a UFO encounter story where the first few phases of the story are very weird and don't make sense, right? But as the story progresses, it becomes more and more like space travelers or time travelers or space-time travelers or multi-dimensional travelers interacting with a human family at a farmhouse. And so what will happen is that if you're allowed time, your mind will paint over it less, right? It will backfill less and less and less over time because it's buffering you from the sudden shock of interdimensional beings are trying to interact with you right now in your front yard. Or, Also, if beings from outside time are trying to interact with you, you have to understand that what's going on there is a collapse of time-space. It's not just weirdos from another dimension are here. No, no, no. It's two dimensions of reality are meeting and warping together. That messes up time. It messes up the possibility of identity. It messes up physics. It messes shit up. It does not sustain the previously sustainable sovereignties of thought, expectation, identity, form. None of that. All that stuff goes out the window, right? So we have to think carefully about this in thinking about how the humans are responding to unidentified anomalous phenomena. I love that, unidentified, right? We're basically straight up saying like we can't categorize it. Anomalous, it's like saying can't categorize phenomena. Or even we can't categorize uncategorizable phenomena. And you know, the sort of the magistrates of identity are saying, well, there's no evidence that it's weird. It's just things we don't have enough data about. If we had enough data, they'd fall into the categories we expect them to. Balloons and Venus and marsh gas and virtual drone things and LED lights. It's an AI artifact in our minds. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Good luck. That's bullshit. That's true for, some 70% of maybe the commonly reported stuff. It's not true for the rest of it. There's a whole branch of reality that doesn't fit in the category lexicon at all, and it violates that lexicon. It violates everything we think. And the reason it violates everything we think is that most of what we think is puerile. It's childish. It has nothing to do with the nature of what's going on, our nature, nature's nature, the meaning of the sky, the nature of origin, intelligence, minds, nothing to do with any of that, right? Nothing. It's made up to shield us from that. Got to walk away from the music for a moment, and I'm in an echoing tunnel. Imagine that you're in a universe and your bones are lighter than toothpicks, and the slightest breeze of reality will blow you up into the sky. So what do? You hide behind shields. You make shields in language and concept and category, and you hide behind them to protect you from that weird wind that will suck you up into the great mystery of the sky. And this is what the humans have been doing, at least since the relationships with the sky intelligences were broken. And also with the dead, right? Not just the sky intelligences, but with the dead and with the sky intelligences. Both of these things got broken. The humans went nuts, and they started making shields and hiding behind them. Yeah. Poor humans. All right, so here's the other problem. When faced with phenomena that you can't structure in consciousness, your waking mind is going to protect you from it, and it's going to do that by painting over it so that you will literally see something that isn't there. Because if you were to see what is there, quote unquote, it would drive you mad. What does madness mean? Well, it depends, but it's not going to be good for you in most cases because you're not prepared to go outside the well-trodden pathways of your cognitive and categorical history. All right. Now, what if there were cultures on Earth, humans, groups of them, that want to drive you mad? How might they do that? Well, one of the ways they would do that is they would weaponize this potential that I've been talking about to face you with things that you can't know what they are. There was a phase in 2022 when regularly in the news feed on the mobile version of Facebook there would be advertisements for objects. And this is a sliding horizontal bar with maybe 12 sequential objects left to right. And you can slide the bar and you see a new object, and these are objects that are for sale. Well, not only could I not tell what those objects were, I couldn't tell what kind of object they were, and I'm a technician. So I couldn't tell, like, is this an object that fixes cars? Is it a computer thing? What is it? I couldn't tell what they were. Facebook was attempting to sell me objects whose categories are indiscernible. They cannot be derived. I have photographs of objects like this, screenshots that I've taken. But here's what I want to get at. If another country wanted to destroy the United States, they wouldn't have to do it by attacking us. Also, we are economic partners, so they have to make sure that, like, we have to buy their products and they have to buy products from us and so forth. We're sort of economically linked. So what they might do instead is just undermine our capacity to understand phenomena at all, right? To make sense of the world. And since what Americans do a lot is shop, one of the best ways to do that would be to give us an experience of shopping that is so incoherent and insurmountably, endlessly diverse that the foundations of our capacity to derive identity will warp. And once that happens, all kinds of things happen in a sequence. A cascade of cognitive disasters ensues, where we can't make sense of anything. And this is why I've said recently in another video, 2024 is not a year. Because the foundations of the faculties that we use to derive and understand identity and continuity in identity and meaning and sequences of events and time, all of these things have been intentionally ambiguated and weaponized on purpose as a military endeavor by the structures presently in game theoretical combat on the world stage. And to say we're in trouble is the grossest kind of understatement. It's as if the apocalypse already happened and we're a dead species walking and we just can't figure it out. That doesn't mean there's no hope or that there's nothing we can do. There's all kinds of amazing things you can do even in an absolute disaster as human beings and as minds. And part of what we can do is to understand the situation that we're in and gain insight into it together. But, I mean, if you go to Amazon and you try to buy a pair of socks or a light bulb or a fork or a pot or a pan or anything, what you're going to see in most cases is a barrage of Chinese products. Please don't try to accuse me of racism. This has nothing to do with a preference for some ethnicity or anything like that. What I'm trying to say is that the Chinese, as a military power, have figured out that the primary activity that powerful Americans engage in is shopping. And so what they've done is they've created a barrage of incoherent shopping experiences that foundationally cause us to begin hallucinating in our categorical expectations of meaningful identity of objects. It is impossible to find a simple solution to a shopping problem on Amazon in 2024. Temu isn't a shopping platform, it's a weapon. It's a weapon. Look at it, try to understand. This is a military device. And what it attacks is the possibility of a coherent commercial transaction where you desire a product, you go to buy it, the process succeeds, you're charged, you get a receipt, you go home. That process has been drawn into a psyop-like phantasmagoria of both the impossibility of fulfillment and the promise of of what? Transcendental meta-fulfillment. The promise of transcendental meta-fulfillment coupled with the impossibility of simple fulfillment is the recipe to rip the American mind to shreds, to just destroy this nation. And it will. That one thing, that is a masterwork of asymmetric military advantage that takes the principle of the UAP and applies it militarily to consumerism. It will devastate America. That one thing, that one weapon makes nukes unnecessary. Your Air Force won't help you. Your Navy, trivial. You got soldiers, we don't care. We have markets. We have Temu. We will become you. You will become us. I mean, this is so psychologically dangerous. Anything that attacks the capacity of a given people's ability to determine whether there's a difference between something, to detect drift in a situation. If you can attack that thing, the capacity to detect drift, you can own that population militarily. You can own them ideologically. You don't have to win, see? You don't have to get them waving Chinese flags. You have to get them so confused that they can't wave an American flag. They can't wave any flag. And it's not that flag waving is the goal. What I'm trying to say is humans have social, ideological, and intellectual coherence with cohorts. And if you obliterate that, you can steal anything from them. Their history, their future, their ideology. You can just inject nonsense into all the places that were previously structured relatively coherently, even if they were structured by lethal fictions. You can replace those lethal fictions with delusions. And then you can just, anything you want is yours, right? They will no longer represent a threat to you or your agenda. They won't be able to form up any kind of resistance or concern. The incoherence in their social systems will destroy them. So this is the weaponization of the possibility of that which is to the waking mind what the intrusion of the momenta that presage the collapse of the dreaming manifold are to the dreaming mind. This is a dire situation. It's one form of a process I call frame collapse. We're going to talk more about that process in future explorations. I don't want to leave you with the grim, the grim footprint of a terrifying future, but the humans are in a series of multipolar traps. We're going to have to invent ways of being human together that are so amazing, liberating, insightful, inspiring, and joyful to participate in, that nothing can outcompete them. That is well within our capacity. The challenges that we're facing will catalyze this, and given any kind of support whatsoever, I will spend my energy to ensure a future that looks like that, together with those of like mind and heart and intention. So it's not all grim apocalypse, but wow, are we on 60 different cliffs at the same time. I love this world. I love the humans. I know something of our origins and natures, their transcendental character, and they are beautiful and profound. They will not fall gently before an assault like those are dissociated societies are forging. They will not fall before that, but I'm afraid a bit of a storm is coming, dear hearts. So for now, take a moment to comment, share. If you have a little bit of money and you want to support my work, anything matters. $1 a month would be great. I have a Patreon. You can send me a one-time donation if you want. Feel free to get in touch directly if you have questions or concerns, or leave questions in the channel and I'll respond to them. Or just tell me what you think, you know. Did you get something valuable here? Because I'm trying to give you gifts and keys that'll get us all out of cages. So if you have an idea about how I might do that more effectively or more beautifully, I'd love to hear from you. Remember your origins, remember your childhood, remember the beauty of your originary imperatives, your dreaming, your altruistic heart, your heroic beauty. May your life and relationships be beautiful and healing, adventurous and ecstatic. So grateful to have this time together. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.